Hey everybody, welcome to We've Got Ward, a Daily Planet Productions podcast series where we expertly dissect and discuss Ward, Wildbow's return to the world of parahumans. My name is Matt Freeman, and this is my obsidian statue duplicate, Scott Daly.
Am I alive? Do I exist?
Only when I'm not talking.
Oh my god. Then I must never stop talking. Fortunately, that won't be a problem for me because, as you said, this is the podcast where you and I eagerly dive into Wildbow's world of crystal surfboards, handsy supervillains, and alien-based death powers as we analyze and interpret this ongoing web serial. This week, part 2 of Arc 6 Pitch, covering chapters 6.4 and 6.5. And we've got a couple of really good chapters here, Matt. There are some weeks in this thing where I'm like a little worried about whether or not we're going to have enough to talk about to fill a whole episode worth. This is not one of those. There's a lot of stuff going on in these chapters, and there's a lot to really dive into and dissect. Yeah,
these are some, like, on the one hand, particularly great battles where you could, like, you felt the ebb and flow and the tension and the drama of the fighting, and also simultaneously character moments among like 8 different characters were being doled out right and left, and it was really, I actually, like, both of these chapters were ones where I just like rushed through them the first time because I was so like tense and so into it, which of course does not make for good analysis, but the first time through I definitely had to just like know what happened, as quickly as possible.
Yeah. I think they're, especially 6.5, particularly well written. There's a lot of stuff going on in that chapter, a lot of very emotional realization type things. Mm-hmm. And I think the writing really supports the importance of the moment. And we're going to get to one moment in particular that I think might be my favorite section of the book so far. So I can't wait to talk about it.
Yeah, me too. All right, just a quick announcement. If anyone didn't notice the Weaver Dice trailer that came out, we're starting a Weaver Dice campaign. The first episode will probably come out next week. I honestly wish that we could have recorded the first episode sooner, but it is actually really difficult to schedule 4 people, and frankly, that's probably going to continue to be an issue. But we're it's coming out. So and currently we're planning on recording sessions every other week. We may up that frequency, but we may not. We'll see. It's one of those things where, kind of like with We've Got Worm, we have to just do it and see how it falls out and how it works into our lives.
Yeah. We do, for those of you that don't know, we do another podcast. We're just like our movie focused podcast. We are tentatively looking at maybe switching that to an every other week schedule to make room to do this, because we record those on Sunday nights, and Sunday night just happens to be the night that all 4 of us are normally free. So that would be a perfect time to record this. So we're looking into maybe alternating those every other week and seeing how that goes. One of the other big unknowns here is we don't know how long it's going to take to edit these things. It's not something we've ever done before, so we want to put the production value into it. We want to trim the fat, as it were, and that could take way longer than we think it will. So we're shooting to record the first episode this coming Sunday. When does that mean the episode's going to come out? I don't know.
We'll see.
It could be as early as Tuesday. I'm not going to say Monday. It could be as early as Tuesday. It could be as late as Friday. Or maybe not even that week. We're kind of just playing it by ear here, but it is happening. I think the response to that little teaser you put together was really inspiring, Matt. Like, it really made me excited to do this thing, because like it's one of those things where you're like, I think this is good, but I don't know if they're gonna. And for the most part, the response is really positive. So thanks for those of you that listened and let us know what you thought. We're hoping to keep up the level of quality you saw in that teaser throughout the whole thing. I think it's going to be a fun experience.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. Everyone seems excited.
Yeah, and we got a bunch of questions on it, and I think we're going to use like the first episode to answer a bunch of those questions as we're like setting up what the game is and who our characters are, and we'll answer all those questions then. So if you asked us something and we haven't answered yet, look for that in the first episode.
Yep, that's right.
Cool.
All right, moving on to the community spotlight, where we read what people wrote from last week's Reddit thread. The discussion question from last week was pick a character you're interested in and talk about some facet of their character that's interesting to you. You know, it could be their trauma, their personality, really anything from a writing characterization standpoint. First, Megafire writes about Carol, unsurprisingly.
I'm shocked.
Yeah. And Megafire says, they always thought that the Amy situation was awful and was basically forced on Carol. And Carol being a terrible mother to her adopted daughter wasn't really her fault. But the more we see of her interaction with Victoria and the more we learn about that, the more we see that she wasn't a great mother to her either. Her seemingly disinterested behavior toward Victoria's non-cape achievements, and more recently her using psychological abuse tactics on Victoria in order to teach her about about how to be a better cape. This behavior makes sense when you look at it in the lens of Carol's trigger, though, because she doesn't trust people, so the only way to survive is to learn to control them. And to quote Megafire, trust, safety, control. Carol's life revolves around these three things, and her desperate grasp for the latter two, combined with her lack of the former, has destroyed her family and left her absolutely alone.
A great comment from our resident Carol expert, Megafire, as always. I really like that. When we had the idea to this question, I knew that's what Megafire was going to do, and I was worried because I was like, well, we haven't seen a lot of Carol recently. There's been other things going on. Will there be enough to talk about? Foolish me. Of course there is.
Yeah, and this is of course a really interesting comment. The only thing that kind of snags at me is referring to what Carol's doing as psychological abuse tactics, and that suggests a level of intentionality behind what Carol's doing, whereas I almost feel like Carol can't help herself.
Yeah.
But I guess you could say that doesn't make it not psychological abuse.
Yeah. I don't think I didn't get from the what he wrote that was intended, that it was intended to show a intentional type of psychological abuse, but just like, I need to protect you because the world is awful and everyone is terrible, and here's what I learned.
Right.
All right. Next we had Joe Stidge, who picked Victoria and used Victoria as kind of a reflection of the overall theme of Ward of recovery. So they say that Victoria is a perfect example of the desire after experiencing a severe trauma to attempt to revert to a state of normalcy. Victoria it clings to old rules, wants capes and cape conflict to operate under those old rules, even when it's kind of clear that they don't seem to apply. The one thing that they pointed out that I really liked was even things like the cape trivia Victoria studies is proven to no longer be applicable by Valefor's new voice power. So once again, we're using, it's a great example of using old rules and old standards that no longer apply because Valefor has changed. But Joe Stidge also says that there's another side to recovery, this realization that you can't go back to normal, but you can build a new normal. And they say that Victoria reflects this as well. She kind of admits that her old life is gone. When she returns to being a cape, she doesn't resume her old identity, but instead works towards building a new one. They also point out her declining Amy's offer to remove those old memories instead of hoping to learn from them and to become a better person. Based off of that experience. And then lastly, they say, like Victoria, the world has been broken and is trying to pull itself together again. Like Victoria, people are learning that no matter how hard they try, things aren't ever going to be the same. But perhaps, like Victoria, they can find a way to make the new normal even better than the original. It will be a long road full of painful missteps, but recovery always is. And I like that a lot.
Yeah, this is a great comment and a great sentiment. I don't know who it was who first said this or noticed this, but the idea that the theme of Worm was trauma and the theme of Ward is going to be recovery from trauma, or one of the themes, that's very beautiful, and I love that.
Yeah.
Googleplex Byte writes about Victoria and power classification. They say, I like how Victoria is trying to drill into her head the notion that she's a thinker one. her brute classification seems to be a big part of how she used to approach things. Now she's going for the warrior monk thing, and she's trying to classify her powers in a way that makes it fit, so that being a warrior monk is part of her base identity, making it a natural conclusion to her power set, so it stops being what she ought to be and starts being what she is.
Yeah, that's very cool. And that's something I think we're going to bring up throughout this chapter, is that idea of the Thinker One, which is something that she's said about herself a couple times now, that her eagle eye, fly up in the sky and look around power, she considers a thinker power, which is a pretty great characterization moment for Victoria, I think.
Yeah, she's definitely leaning on that a lot, and leaning on her situational awareness so that she can strike more surgically.
Yeah. All right. Lastly, Stuck in Reddit Factory picked Contessa and used Contessa as kind of a reflection of the protagonists in Worm and maybe possibly Ward. Contessa and Cauldron are the ideal wrong things for the right reasons theme personified. Both, and then they go on to say that both Contessa and Taylor offer two of humanity's potential responses to an intractable threat. That is, to be maximally effective on Cauldron and Contessa's side, and everyone working together on Taylor's side. And he also mentioned that it wasn't an accident that these two people who took different approaches to this threat meet at the very end of the novel to talk about the reasons behind their different approaches. And I agree with that. Stuck in Reddit Factory then kind of carries this forward into Ward and wonders if Contessa, now resuming her Fortuna persona, will continue to offer a reflection of the protagonist of Ward. Maybe we'll see whatever she's doing in her quasi-retirement, if she's even in the story, could be a reflection of a different way to approach recovery from the way that Victoria is doing. And that's an interesting thought, and I think that's something we'll have to pay attention to.
Yeah, that's an awesome observation. I love it. This take that Contessa is like this theme personified, and I mean her power is sort of a plot device turned into power form, and that was always one of the clever things about the Parahumans world, is that powers are kind of treated that way, and this is a great take on Contessa.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there was another thread that you wanted to mention, Scott.
Yeah, there was a thread, I forget when it was posted, maybe the past couple of days, talking about how, just generally asking the question, is the subreddit and therefore kind of the Worm community as a whole overly obsessed with the entities and the shards and how they play into character actions, decisions, and choices? And I wanted to bring this up just because we kind of touched on this very lightly in last week's episode. We were talking about the idea that we don't want to push too much onto the shard to where it takes the agency away from the character, and that these two things don't have to be mutually exclusive. It doesn't have to be this is the shard versus this is the human. We need to think these. The shard serves as a metaphor for the trauma, and therefore we can see how the things that happen to us push us in a certain direction and nudge us to a certain sort of behavior. But we shouldn't forget that the decisions that are being made are still central to who the characters are as people. And I think that what I saw in the response to this thread was that a general agreement with that sentiment, that the entities are important, the shards are important, they're clearly going to be an important part of this story as well, but to not go too far into that to the point that we lose who the characters are, and we push off blame or push off traits or decisions or choices to the entity and away from our characters.
Right. The entities are this perfectly elegant kind of sci-fi explanation for why we're allowed to have this superhero story in the first place, and have it make sense and feel credible in ways that many other superhero properties are not. But I think it is probably a mistake to just think about everything in terms of that science fiction justification, when that's really, I think, probably the correct function for it. The correct function for it is as a justification, as a sci-fi backdrop, not as the thing to focus on. Yeah,
and I think going forward, seeing how the shards and how the entities are used in this story, we need to, I think, instead of maybe focusing on them as just that plot device. Try to search for the meaning behind that. What does that say about our characters? What does that say about the world? What does that say about what Ward is trying to say as a whole? How do whatever's happening with the shards, how do these broken triggers, how does the broken cycle reflect the overall message of the book? And I think that's the part that I think is okay to focus on the shards with, not getting into like the nitty gritty of is she doing this specifically because the shard said so, or is this her decision, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. All of that said, I'm very curious to learn about what is different with the shards now that Scion is dead. That's going to be really interesting. But that's a separate thing from what we're talking about, I think.
Yeah. But again, what is different with the shards now that Scion is dead? But carry that forward. How does that difference tie into the themes of the book? Right.
Exactly. All right, let's move on into chapter 6.4. So picking up right where we left off, the fallen soldiers come screaming down the hill toward Victoria and the patrol block. Several of the fallen capes hang back to protect Mama, and Victoria reflects on the power synergies that Mama has managed to build up over time. Later on in this chapter, she'll wonder about why so many fallen have such good powers. So I think this is something that we should be wondering about too.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to kind of look here as we start off to examine how the writing leads you to those kind of conclusions. Like the book wants you to be thinking about certain things and wants to guide you to certain conclusions when it wants those things to be clear. And I think we see here kind of how it's doing that. And this ties into something we talked about last week where I had pointed out to you that, hey, this beating the drum about the color coding of Fallen seems like so obvious and explicit that it seems like some sort of setup. And I don't think it is a setup in the way I meant it, like that it was going to pay off in some kind of subversion way. I think what this is doing is priming us to understand exactly which capes are for which sect, and that ties into how much we understand and know about the Fallen. And as we grow to understand who this organization is or what this organization is, knowing which capes are for which one is really important to that. So the text kind of primes us for that. And I think that really ties into these two chapters because our knowledge of the Fallen will continue to grow, which will culminate in a big question at the end of these chapters, that a choice that Victoria has to make based on these guys might be way more serious and way more powerful than we thought they were. And all this stuff, all the things that are happening, the questioning of how do these people have so many good powers? How are they able to recruit people? Which people are for the Mather sect versus the Crowley sect? All this stuff ties into this overall understanding we're being given of something's really, really crazy about these guys. More than just, this is just a small settlement on the edge of town.
Yeah, I think coming into these chapters, one might have the impression that, like, okay, we're gonna wipe out these Mathers, and then we're gonna be done with the Fallen part of Ward. And it's become apparent by the end of these two chapters that we're probably not going to be done with the Fallen after this battle is resolved.
Yeah, I certainly thought that. I certainly thought it was a great primer into the idea of second chances and redemption and recovery, and how what people are deserving of that and what people aren't. It seemed like a perfect way into that discussion, and then one we could abandon to move on to other things. But no, you're absolutely right. It seems like we're sticking with this thing for the time being.
Yeah, well, they're a great foil to Victoria and the kind of hero she is, particularly now that she's taking on this like angel hero theme.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Demons and angels.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it works.
Yeah. So as the battle commences, Ashley, who is there but not yet fighting, asks permission from Gilpatrick to join the fight. He refuses to give that permission, not necessarily because he doesn't want her to fight, but because he refuses to just issue a blanket sanction on whatever happens if she joins in.
Yeah, probably a good call on his part, but holy shit, Matt, how huge of a moment is this for Ashley? Like, when we last left her, she had lost control. She had killed someone. And then for a brief moment after this, she seemed like she was just going to rationalize it away. Like she was just going to posture and just like embrace the villain side and say, well, I had to do that, blah, blah, blah. But that's not what she does. She separates herself from the situation, and now we learn she's turned herself into the patrol block. And more than that, she's submitting, not only has she turned herself into them, but she's fully submitting herself to their authority. She will not act without their permission. And I think we can definitively conclude now that what she did really messed her up. And while I am still worried about her, worried about how she's going to handle all this stuff, I look at this as a pretty positive sign that she's taking the steps necessary to correct or make sure that the mistake she made doesn't happen again.
Yeah, there were basically two ways she could have reacted, right? She could have been like, oh, I screwed up. I killed somebody. All right, fuck it. I guess I'm a villain now. Or she could have been like, okay, I need to really redouble my efforts and my conviction and seriousness about trying to be a hero, and or at least not being someone who snaps and kills someone, someone who's in control of herself.
Yeah.
And you're exactly right. This is a great sign that she's actually on the right track.
Yeah, I mean, Ashley did not seem like the type of person that would go to some other system of authority and ask permission. Mm-hmm. And that is a change, absolutely. And I think it's overall a good one.
Yeah. So Victoria now picks up a big heavy rock, and then she flies with it, using it as a shield.
Should we have like a 30-minute conversation about how the rock is probably heavier than she says it is?
No.
Okay.
Okay. So as she's flying, she thinks fights were about information first, positioning second, action third. And this is where she refers to her flight as a faux thinker one power, which she may have done before, but I definitely noticed it this time, especially in the context of like thinking, intelligence, planning, situational awareness being how she now views kind of the cornerstone of her outlook and strategy.
Absolutely. And I think from everything we saw in Worm, I think her order of importance is pretty spot on, right? I think the reason why Taylor was able to be so successful is because she was like really good at being able to gather information and scout the field and know where people are and what they were doing, as well as positioning. Mm-hmm. And so that's a pretty smart observation from Victoria. And I love, like, we don't think of Victoria as the old Victoria very often, like the person that was really connected to the PRT, the person that was really involved with the legal approved heroing that happened back in Worm. So it makes sense that she would refer to power classifications and she would assign power level numbers to things. I'm actually kind of surprised that she hasn't done this more over the course of the book so far, that she hasn't like classified someone as a power level or mentioned power levels as much. But then again, she wasn't like ever like officially part of the Protectorate, I don't think. So I guess that kind of makes sense. But
yeah, I mean, based on my understanding of the reason you would do that in the first place would be like to give someone else a sense of exactly what they were going up against or exactly what measures they should have prepared. And since her team isn't on the same page, she wouldn't be like, oh, that's a breaker 6, because that's not going to mean anything to them. So, you know, I mean, I do understand what you're saying, though, that like in her thought process is, I bet she could do it if she had to, you know?
Right. Yeah.
So this rock she's carrying, she uses it as a bowling ball and tosses it, or rather she lets it roll and quote unquote demolishes some dudes who are carrying weapons. And she thinks to herself, the warrior monk would have been fine with it due to the fact that they were armed, basically. Then she starts laying into people at close range with the wretch and with her own body. Yeah.
So we're seeing throughout this part of the battle that Victoria is basically going right up to the line of going all out, and she is making a lot of justifications for why this is okay. One of the things she mentions is that the police would have been licensed to open fire on these people at this point, which is true. And I don't think that the book is telling us that Victoria is wrong for using the force that she is. Though I do think that her throwing a giant rock at people is pretty clever callback to that time where she threw a dumpster at someone in the beginning of Worm. But I don't think that the book wants us to conclude, hey, she's acting to an overly violent, inappropriate level. That's not what I think the book is saying. But this idea that the warrior monk would have been fine with it, I think that is where Victoria is lying to herself. And I think it's to the point where, like, she describes some of the violence that she's doing. Like, there's this line where she says, "The wretch and I relieved him of the burden of having to carry a rifle and having unbroken hands," which is like a cool, quippy thing to say. And I'm not weighing in on like the morality of the move to destroy someone's hands with a gun, because obviously the person has a gun and they could hurt you. But it's like the way she describes that violence it's so like blasé.
Yeah.
And I think the thing about this that is so interesting to me is Victoria has now externalized the different parts of her. There was actually someone on Twitter, Asgar Zeigel, that pointed this out while I was doing my live read, so credit to them, that Victoria is externalizing the warrior monk here. Like, the warrior monk would be okay with it. And it's almost like she's doing it because she knows that she's failing to live up to it. And I think that's absolutely right. That is what she's doing. And the idea of externalizing a portion of her is not something that's new to Victoria. She does it with the wretch all the time. And I think what that leaves us with is a character that has two different sides of her being. And she's now kind of externalizing both of them. The monk side and the wretch side are both not in her. She's pushed them out. And where does that leave Victoria?
Yeah, that's really fascinating that she almost has these two poles, like the monk representing what she views as her best self, or you know, the version of her that's able to make the right decision all the time and remain cool all the time, and the wretch, which just represents everything she sees about, like, all of the worst things about herself as she is now, personified, like her trauma personified, literally. And
also the worst part about her old self as well. Mm-hmm. Like, she was overly violent, overly brutal back in her old Cape days. And that's what the wretch is now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I don't know. I don't see it as bad that she has, I'm going to use the word personified rather than externalized, not because I necessarily disagree with externalized, but once you personify these two poles, then at least she can get a handle on what she's doing in the moment and ask herself, am I being true to my best self, by way of comparing it to this yardstick, which is the warrior monk, which clearly in her mind is a very clear thing, or at least I hope so, because otherwise that's also kind of risky. That's something that may be a tangent, but it's interesting that what is the warrior monk? Like, she hasn't, it's not like she's defined the warrior monk. It's not like she sat down like with a piece of paper and written down, like, here's my warrior monk code with 10 bullet points enumerated. These are my rules that I don't break. The warrior monk is an ethos, but it's not actually concretely defined by Victoria.
No, it's more of a feeling than a definitive set of standards. Yeah.
And that gives it a little bit of room for slippage.
Yep.
Which is something to pay attention to, maybe.
But I think the coolest thing about this is that this is a perfect way to illustrate Victoria's ongoing identity crisis, because she has these two things that, and I think you're right that personified might be a better word, that she has these two different parts of herself, and right now she doesn't consider herself either. There's the warrior monk and there's the wretch, and neither of those are her in her mind, but they are, like, mm-hmm. like the warrior monk, she is part warrior monk, she is part wretch, and the more she externalizes those personifications, the more she's kind of left stuck in the middle in this limbo between them. And I think that's just a perfect way to characterize what a identity crisis looks like.
Yeah, and I mean, you're right that it's dangerous to have such a stark dichotomy, because then you run the risk of, oh, I failed to live up to the warrior monk, therefore I am the wretch.
Yeah.
which is not that's not being fair to yourself as a human being, because we never live up to our highest ideals.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and right now she doesn't consider herself either. Remember, like she's the warrior monk would be okay with this. The wretch is definitely different. She'd never so far call that a part of herself.
Yeah.
So she's kind of in limbo, and I don't know. I think you're right that doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing, but it's just like when you're trying to find yourself and you consider yourself different from all these other things, that it's a little messy.
Yeah, I agree. So speaking of all of this idea of externalizing and personifying the wretch, this is the first time that I've noticed that she refers to the wretch as she in her thoughts.
Yeah, and I can't say that I've been paying close enough attention to that throughout the entire story so far to like say yes you are right or no you are wrong, that she's used she before. But I know in this chapter for sure, it's it until this one moment where it's she, and the one moment where it's she is the moment that it gets a little too far and digs its fingers into someone's chest.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think this is intentional and significant in this sense of, you know, on some level, what is healthy to do with trauma is to kind of absorb it into your being in a way that is no longer painful. And she's doing the opposite in the sense that she's now named it. Like it's an other to the extent that it's named and it has a gender. So that's not, to my mind, that is not the path toward integration with and peace with her trauma.
No, I think you're right there. Yeah. The more it's like it's moving up the steps of personification. You know, it's not first. It's a separate thing, but it's like an amorphous entity. It doesn't. And now, yeah, she's giving characteristics to it. She's gendered it now. And I wonder if. I mean, the gendering of it makes sense because it looks kind of like her, and it is her. I wonder if that's significant, though.
Right. I mean, because really, it's a shard, so it's genderless. So the fact that she has given it a gender, well, okay, that's interesting because that almost implies that she is seeing it as something like her rather than something alien. I don't know how to take that exactly. Yeah. It's really fascinating, though.
It is, absolutely. It's fun to speculate on, anyway.
Yeah. From just one word.
That's what we do. That's what we do.
Yeah. So at this point in the battle, Victoria feels a powerful hate so strong that she thinks that it might be from a power, but it's not. It's just prompted by the sight of the bloody wounds created by the wretch fingernails.
Yeah, and I pulled the entire quote. I don't know if we want to read it. I really wish we could. It's so good. Like. Yeah. It's so good.
Yeah, I mean, you can read whatever parts of it you want. Like basically, first she goes over, she's really getting philosophical here as she thinks about it. She thinks about the hate that she felt when she was basically shut down and told that her opinions weren't valid when she was younger. She hated it's she compares it to the hate that she felt for her sister when her sister broke her brain, and she basically had to twist the passionate, devoted love that she was feeling into passionate hate so that she could keep control of herself. And then she hates the wretch in the same way because that's what it represents and the loss of control of it. And then she hates all the people who she's just physically demolished. Quote, I think this is the key quote here. I hated that when I'd had the ability to be gentle, I hadn't been. And now that I wanted to be gentle, I couldn't.
Yeah.
And then to top it off, I hated the fallen.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, all this is great. That I think you're right that last one is key to the whole thing. But I do like the writing here is especially good because to establish how strong this feeling is, we start off by declaring it a power, right? The feeling hit me so suddenly and so unexpectedly that I thought it might have been one of Rain's cluster mates. So, like, this is such a strong, sudden feeling that it seems artificially generated. It can't be coming from me. There's no way. It's too sudden, too soon, too quick, and too strong to be just something that exists inside of me. But no, it is. And we get to learn so much more about her throughout this little thing, because she talks about this kid in class that she fought with who was being a racist asshole, and it kind of clues us into why she was so violent with that Empire 88 person, because this is something she felt very passionate about even as a kid, and like he referred to her as a pretty privileged white girl, so now she's getting sexism thrown her way, and she's not being taken seriously. Like there's so many things happening to her right now, and the Amy stuff, of course, is just insanely important. And I like how, I don't know if she's been, or not within my memory, that she's been quite as honest about the parts of what Amy did to her and why they were so impactful. Like this idea that she says she'd broken something intrinsic in me. She had torn open emotional doors I had really wanted to protect and be tender with so soon after I had lost Dean. So it's not just that Amy manipulated her emotions and made her feel feelings for herself. It's that she took a part of her that she had closed down due to her grief and her loss, and she planted something new there herself when Victoria was not ready. Like she had closed that emotional part off to her because she couldn't take it yet. She was still grieving. She was still dealing with the loss of a person she loved. And here comes Amy, is like, nope, get over him now. It's my turn. And man, like this is so brutally honest.
Yeah, and this is one of those thoughts that I don't think she could have thought in her head until more recently, because it wasn't until recently that she wasn't even thinking Amy's name at all.
Yeah.
And she couldn't talk about anything related to this without like losing control of her body.
I know. Remember the first arc where like just thinking about Amy, almost like she like went catatonic.
Yeah, right. She would like zone out. And this is, so this is a bit of honesty. You know, she's not telling us this, right? She's almost telling herself this. She's having a little moment here. I think it's fascinating how she lists all these things together where she's comparing all these hates, and these are all reasonable. Some of them are connected, that like the Wretch and Amy are connected to each other, but most of these things are not connected. And I think that's an interesting thing about human psychology, is we're actually pretty bad about doing this, where we drag all of the negative shit in our lives together into a big pile and just kind of like make ourselves feel worse about it, and like it's all related and that it all means something, when it doesn't usually.
Yeah.
It doesn't, like that like part of cognitive behavioral therapy is learning not to do that, actually. So it's interesting that she's doing it here, actually.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, because what does her Wretch digging into some guy's chest have to do with that time that racist asshole in high school dismissed my opinions because I was a pretty girl? There's no real connection there other than the emotional tie. The only connection there is the extreme anger and hatred. And so she's linking all these things together that don't necessarily apply. Yeah.
Oh, and this is a very human thing to do.
Sure. Yeah. I don't want to come off like we're judging her, like, oh, Victoria, you're doing this thing again. No, it's just she's dealing with some shit, and she's really frustrated. She keeps ping-ponging back and forth between like feeling useless, like I'm not getting anything done, I'm not doing anything, and then when she does feel useful, it's like, oh, and here we go again. Now I feel like I'm losing the warrior monk. I'm being too violent. I hate this. I wanna be this controlled, calm person that's saving the good people. I want to be this gentle hero, and I can't now. And it's driving me insane, and it's making me hate everything, including myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good point. Yeah. So so basically in this rampage she goes on here, she defeats the Untowered Fallen, and then she verbally threatens them further, clearly showing her anger. But before she can really kind of lock down the victory, she's ambushed by a fast-moving cape. It's a young Crowley woman, it looks like, with a Leviathan theme to her costume. Her power involves switching off with the duplicate, where only one of the two is active at a time and the other is seemingly an invulnerable statue. The attack is literally cutthroat. The woman tries to garrote her, and it's only Victoria's spiky, wretch-like costume that saves her from having her throat cut.
Oh, like it's symbolism. I get it. No, it's small little tiny beats like that I absolutely love. That it's not even explicitly spelled out for you. It's just like, yeah, the cord doesn't get around her neck because her costume's there. The costume that was specifically made to look like the wretch.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I also like in her internal monologue, she mentions the garrote and then says, "Not my teammate."
Right.
It's not that one.
Yeah. It's just super clear.
Yeah.
Victoria fights the woman for a bit, seemingly roughly evenly matched, getting in a few minor licks, but also taking some solid hits, including one to the head. Ashley then swoops into the rescue, reminding her that Rain needs help and they can't dawdle. Victoria then asks the fallen woman if her duplicate is actually alive, and the woman doesn't answer. She then tries to garrote Ashley, and Ashley blows away the duplicate, which effectively wins the fight.
So hopefully it wasn't alive.
Yeah, my first thought was like, I wonder if that was another Case 70 type thing. I wonder if that was her sister.
Yeah, I feel like there would have been more significance to that moment had that been true. I don't think so.
Yeah.
But I do love Ashley's entrance here. Like, so she's gotten her warning from Gilpatrick that any behavior she does here will be noted, good or bad, and reported good or bad. But she doesn't just step in here to do violence. Like, she's not here just to like work out some aggression, just to blow shit up. That's not what she's doing here. The first thing she says to Victoria when she drops in is, R needs help. Rain needs help. I just heard he needs help. I'm coming to help you out so we can get to him. So she's back in action now because her team needs her. That's fucking awesome.
Yeah.
And that's like the best possible outcome of this whole oops, I blew a hole in a guy's chest thing.
Yeah. This action scene we just kind of blown through because that's kind of what we tend to do with action scenes. But this was a really excellently written, paced, tense action scene. I love the moment when Ashley comes in. I love them kind of tag teaming this cape, and the dialogue and just everything about this.
Yeah.
So now that they've defeated the Fallen, Erin now tries to supply some information on where Rain might be, and her dad acts like a complete cock about it. Erin, though, kind of stands up to him, but unfortunately she can't really offer much.
Yeah, but the good news is that at least we seem to see that the Erin that had kind of let herself be absorbed by the Fallen and like kind of given up on ever resisting the Fallen seems to be gone here. Like, this one is spouting off about how it was all like they've been lying to us. Everything was a lie, and of course our parents don't seem to be into it. But maybe the events of this day have finally pushed Erin to where she realizes she needs to get the shit out of here. So that's good. Maybe.
Yeah, and this is definitely a step up from then fucking die, Rain.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So Victoria now checks in with Gilpatrick, and Ashley tells her that she's going to stay and protect these people. Protect like a real human being and a real hero.
It's from Drive, everyone.
Yeah.
Matt,
moving on without further comment.
Matt really wanted everyone to understand that reference, so I had to do that.
It's a great film, by the way.
I don't want to get overly excited about this, but I am. This is the best like possible outcome for, oh shit, I just killed a guy. She's still struggling and kind of reeling with the things that she did. Like, I'm sure that's still going on. She's going to have to deal with this stuff. But like we said before, she seems very aware that she fucked up. and she's actively working towards taking steps to make sure that that mistake does not happen again. And knowing when she should go forward, when she should drive into the fight, when she should stay back and help people. That's so different from the posturing, cocky Ashley that we've seen before. And I mean, who knew that like killing some guy might have been the best thing for her?
She just needed to get it out of her system.
There you go.
Yeah. So now, now that we've kind of hit like a inflection point in this chapter, Victoria takes stock. She looks over everyone and she thinks so many people didn't look like the ones I'd known. Aaron and Ashley both lacked the confidence they should have. Gilpatrick looked more like the grizzled soldier than the teacher. Even the fallen, well, they'd been threats, and now the most aggressive and armed of them were on the ground, defenseless, making noises of pain. I didn't look like the me I wanted to be, probably, so soon after donning my new pretty costume. This other me took to the air, flying against the falling rain, so that the gentle patter became something sharp in the brief ascent.
Yeah, so she's externalizing herself again, Matt, this other me. So she's not the wretch, she's not the monk, and she's not even this person.
Yeah.
It's like this it's this perfect like searching for yourself, searching for who you want to be and what you are. I love it. I love it. And I love this idea that look around, everyone, this event has changed everyone. Aaron, Ashley, Gilpatrick, even the fallen. Everyone has felt what has happened here in some way or another. Some physically because their legs are broken, some emotionally, some mentally, but everyone is hurt.
Mm-hmm. And what a wonderful segue as she goes to find Rain.
Yay.
Actually, not quite. So yeah, she calls the rest of the team as she flies, seeking Rain. Kenzie is presumably relieved to learn that Mama isn't dead.
I find it very interesting that you read that as relief, because I'm not so sure. Like we spent the entire last chapter building this like tense level of concern for Kenzie's well-being. We finished the chapter with her dropping cameras on people's heads, and so I read it as maybe like a disappointment. Like I was hoping that I had killed her there. Ashley killed someone. Rain killed someone. I want to be part of the killing people club. That's what I read that as.
Yeah, I mean, that's very interesting. I think it just entirely depends on what your read of where Kenzie is and who Kenzie is it indicates. And I don't even really want to argue in the sense that I would argue for my interpretation. It's just like when I think like about Kenzie, I'm like, oh, I bet she was like felt like she had to do that, and then felt really weird or bad about the fact that she might have killed someone, because that's how a normal person would react, honestly. But perhaps your thesis is that Kenzie is not a normal person. I
mean, here's the thing. It's probably somewhere in between those two things. Like, I think part of her is relieved that she didn't kill a person, but part of her was hoping that she had made this big, huge impact on the battle, and this permanent impact on the battle. And
yeah,
I don't know. I guess we'll see.
Yeah.
I am so afraid for her after the events of that chapter. I can't get that out of my head. I can't get this idea of the slow like build of like stress that she seems to be under, like with her, the person she cared about most has now done this horrible thing. And I don't know. I'm so worried about poor Kenzie. Yeah,
there does seem to be like some intentionality to this element that we haven't actually seen her like physically. We just hear her on the phone. We don't really know how she's doing. We just know how she comes off as.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So Capricorn and Vista are apparently flying around narwhal style, meaning they're riding one of her force fields, the direction being controlled by Vista's space warping power. Victoria then uses her aura to help home in on her allies, which is a fun little power trick. And then they do an aerial rendezvous.
Yeah, it's all really fun power stuff here. Like Vista's controlling the surf crystals by warping space, because they usually just go in one direction, but she's like warping space to make them turn and stuff. The aura locate is really cool, and then this like midair maneuver where she catches them and sets them down, or drops them down, because she's still got a bullet hole in her arm, Matt. We can't forget about the fact that her arm has a hole in it.
Yeah. Throughout the rest of these chapters, I'm not going to pull it out when it happens, but throughout the rest of these chapters, she's like on the verge of passing out whenever she has to actually use her body.
Yeah.
So, yeah, bullet holes are not something to shrug off.
No.
So they're all talking on the phones, on the comms, and when Luxie mentions that her camera is broke, Chris kind of gives her a hard time about it, which culminates in a great line from Kenzie. I didn't weaponize the cameras. I weaponized the off switch, obviously. And so, like, at first, I think the first time I read this, I just kind of read it as like, oh, Chris is giving her a hard time because he always gives her a hard time. But then I kind of was like, well, actually, I find this fascinating because this specifically here scans as vigilance. Like he wants more information. He's not, at first, he's not just ragging on her. He's seeking clarification, which is very consistent with how a form called keen vigilance would behave.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I kind of forgot that was the form he was channeling. But when I went back and read it, Kenzie specifically says, like, stop it with the vigilance. And I was like, oh, yeah. Last week, I mentioned that Chris's like antagonizing of Kenzie might have been a form of like jealousy over her involvement and his lack of involvement in some of the part of the stuff. And I'm not so sure of that anymore. Because we see in this moment that Kenzie just mentions that her camera's broke, which is like the half truth ever. And it's only because of Chris's pestering and vigilance that Kenzie admits what happened, admits what she did. And so you could read this pestering, you could read Chris's kind of constant involvement in her as maybe in his vigilance form, he is seeing things that the rest of the team isn't, and he's concerned and is kind of like checking up on her and keeping track of her and what she's doing. And so I think this is less jealousy motivated and more, hey, I'm concerned, and I'm showing my concern in the most Chris way ever, which is to be pestering and sarcastic.
Yeah, I love that read, actually. I think there's a very good case to be made that Chris actually does care about Kenzie and is just very Chris about showing it.
Yeah.
So Victoria finally sights some of the mutated animals, a grotesquely muscled man with a pig head and a horse with a human face. Victoria approaches them cautiously and speaks to them relatively kindly. They shy away from Chris when he arrives, which is a fun touch because he's so monstrous that these monsters can't even handle it.
It's pretty awful, though, right? I mean,
yeah,
like these poor people. Like we don't really even fully understand how this works, but it seems like he just has done terrible things to these people who feel like they have to follow orders or are being controlled. I'm not sure how the power works, but
see, I thought it was even more twisted and Cronenbergian that these were farm animals that he had like stolen some vestige of humanity from some people permanently and then implanted it in the farm animals.
Jesus.
So like not only are these farm animals like just sentient enough to be in pain, but now there are some people wandering around with some of their humanity like pulled away from them.
Oh my god, fuck the Fallen so much. Kill them all. Just all of them. Just do it.
We've finally broken Scott. He's on Nuke the Site from Orbit team.
Do it. It's the only way to be sure.
Yeah. So Tattletale finally calls in on their channel to try to warn them off from pursuing Rain any further. And she says, your friend Rain is done for. He was always going to be done for. But then Tattletale does tell them where he is. And she says, this is me being nice again, but you don't care. Which, like, why would she tell them that if it's against her best interest? Like, what do we make of her motives here?
I don't know. Like, out of all the mysteries of the story so far, Tattletale is like the hardest one to crack. And I think that's very intentional. Not only is Tattletale like intentionally a shifty, dishonest type person, but our point of view character has just this base level of distrust for her that translates into this basic assumption that everything that she says is not true, everything. So it's really, really hard to read Tattletale's true motivation behind any of this stuff. I think we learn a little bit more next chapter, so maybe we'll save like the diving into what's Tattletale doing conversation when we learn that stuff. But I think we're also going to learn a bunch more in the next chapter. I think it's what the end of 6.5 seems to indicate, at least.
Yeah. Okay.
So I don't know. The answer is I have no idea what she's doing. She's working on some other level. It doesn't make sense that if she truly wanted Cradle to be safe and not attacked, why she would tell Victoria where he is.
Yeah, I mean, she could have just checked out of this whole exchange and just let things play out. And there's definitely a game here, but like you said, I think we just don't know enough yet.
Yep. So
they all go to the barn, and the text states, "The rain was only a trickle now."
This is one of those moments where I read this on my third read through and was like, we gotta pull this quote out and talk about it. And then I went to the script and saw that you did it already, and I was like, yes, same page. It's this great little tiny thing that the rain is dying down as the rain is dying down.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, there were a bunch of mentions of what the rain is doing throughout these chapters, and I didn't pull out every one, but yeah, I mean, it follows that thing you pointed out I believe it was last week, where the rain kind of comes on when Rain arrives on the battlefield, and now as Rain's blood is leaking out, the rain was only a trickle.
Yep. Just fun little symbolism moments. Mm-hmm. Isn't writing awesome? I just love it. I love stories. I love what stories can do.
I love everything about this.
Yes.
So Rain's fallen captors have been butchered, along with a number of the mutant animals. Cradle is in the rafters of the barn, riding his huge hand crab robot. Another guy with a red handprint on his mask and a cleaver is with Cradle. Sveta is damaged, holding a grievously injured Rain.
I love how this scene is set. The blood, the death, Sveta in one corner. Like, we see her and she's like beaming hate. Like she's looking at Cradle and the other guy with like this intense hatred that breaks as soon as she sees Victoria. Like, she sees Victoria and this hatred breaks. Like, there's this moment where you think Sveta might break and break her code, her desire not to hurt people. And then Victoria shows up and this relief washes over her face. Like, she's like, oh, thank God, I'm not going to have to do this. More people are here. And it's so good. And the what remained of Rain, we don't even see the injuries yet. We just get this phrase, what remained of Rain. Like, there's not even enough to just call him Rain, just what remained of him. It's just a perfect way to set the stage for everything that happens in the next chapter.
Yeah, that definitely gave me the sense that he was in pieces. But
yeah.
Made me happy to learn he was only just horribly mutilated.
Happy.
Yeah, right. Happy. So the chapter ends with, "Let's not make this a thing," Cradle said. It was going to be a thing.
Yeah, and this is a great way to end it. I'm not a huge fan of like cliffhangers most of the time, but I think this one works pretty well because it's like we have the stage is set. We know the stakes. Everything is defined. We're not like cutting it off in the middle of that. I think it works here, where a lot of times cliffhangers just annoy me, where it's like they feel artificial. This doesn't feel like an artificial cutoff.
Yeah, no, like that's the thing. Like, it being a web serial, it has to cut off somewhere, and this seems like a good place to do it. If you got to make it, if you got to stop somewhere, right?
Yeah.
It's not like it wasn't a long chapter.
Yeah.
Speaking of, we move into 6.5. And Victoria looks over the scene. She describes Rain's injuries. He's slashed very deeply many times, apparently by the Cleaver Cape, who we'll shortly learn is Operator Red, a combat thinker.
I get some better names, Operator Red. Come on. This is like, what was the eraser guy's name again?
Oh, man.
I can't even remember.
I really should know this,
wow,
considering how many times I've seen Eraser.
We're supposed to know these things. Anyway, I love how this chapter opens, Matt. I like it so much. This opening line here: the weather had relaxed some, but the barn we were in had a corrugated metal roof, and each drop that hit it snapped against the hard, hollow surface. The sound was like a dull static, punctuated by rain's gasp. The word choice here is so wonderfully selected to convey the gravity of the situation, the tenseness of the situation. The raindrops snapping against the surface of the roof, the dull static feeling. It feels uncomfortable. It feels dire. It feels loud and cacophonous and terrible. And I love how that's done. I like it so much.
Yeah. The chapter intros have been on point for the last several.
Yeah.
So Victoria joins Sveta and gets to helping with the first aid for Rain. Rain is at least aware enough to see that she's there. When Red mentions leaving, Victoria tells them that she doesn't intend on letting them walk away from this. The scene kind of continues like this, with her trying to dialogue with the villains while performing first aid. She eventually uses the golden belt of her angelic raiment as a tourniquet to staunch the bleeding of the ex-demon boy. Symbolism.
That's symbolism.
And then we get this line from Cradle, which I think is very interesting, where he's trying to justify himself, trying to argue for why it was okay to do this. And he says, when the bad guy is shitty enough, it stops being revenge and starts being justice.
Yeah. So Matt, it's a pretty interesting moral argument that it would be fun to parse for a little bit here. In our world, if you do a bad thing, you are punished for it. And in some cases, in some states, if the thing is so bad, they put you to death for it. And the state doesn't consider that revenge. They call that justice. And let's say a man is sitting on death row for 40 years. And in that time, he's found God, he's found religion, he's earnestly recognized the error of his ways, and he has chosen to live whatever remaining years he has left, being a good person and trying to do good things in the ways that he can. And then the state kills him. Is that justice? Is that revenge? What does that look like? And I think, I ask these questions and they're almost rhetorical, because I don't know if there's a clear answer here, but I think what Ward is trying to do here is challenge our understanding of these terms through this character, and really, I think it comes down pretty clearly on a side by the end of this whole thing. But in this moment, we're kind of being challenged. Is that true? Is it true? Like, if someone's so bad, so heinous, so awful, and the things they do are so bad, does that stop being revenge at some point? Does it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the text is clearly asking us to confront these questions and to ask whether Cradle might be right here, or if he's not right. I mean, that's kind of what's interesting, is we're strongly biased against him at this point in time, but what he's advocating for is not much different from what our society actually does. And so, if you're against Cradle, are you against criminal justice system?
Right, because in our world, if a boy walks up to a mall and chains a door shut and it gets lit on fire, the defense can't be like, well, I mean, he felt really bad about it afterwards, and he promises he won't ever do it again. I mean, that's good, but our justice system still says, hey, you got to be punished for that.
Yeah.
But what is the correct punishment? And this is, I mean, obviously Cradle takes it to an extreme that is totally beyond what some would call justice. And I think, yes, we are seeing that Cradle is himself hypocritical, and we'll see that throughout this. But the basis of his argument is an interesting one.
Yeah. I actually kind of anticipate there being some interesting discussion about this exact moment.
It's gonna be our discussion question.
Yeah, that's why. That's why I anticipate that. Cradle gets philosophical about it. I mean, he says he wants them to just let him walk away. Let this be the end of it, because otherwise it's going to turn into a cycle of violence. Of course, this principle doesn't apply to him in his mind, because what Rain did was so bad that this isn't revenge. This is justice. This is not just him, continuing the cycle of violence.
Yeah. It's always great to have a person say revenge is bad after they've gotten their revenge. It's very convenient.
Yeah.
The thing that I love about the argument is that Cradle isn't necessarily wrong. Revenge is cyclical. This will be a cycle that will pull more people into it and beget more violence, and it will encourages a cycle of death and violence and revenge. And he's right. Where he errs is in his assumption that his actions are somehow immune from the cycle of revenge. That he is somehow above it and better than it is where he's wrong.
And he actually seems to believe it too. It's not just something he's telling them to persuade them. That's kind of his own inner rationale.
Yeah. Plus he goes on to say things like, everyone we've told the story to has agreed it's fair, it being what they're doing. And that's what he claims. But I'm wondering how they told the story, right? I'm sure they told the part about him locking the door, about him laughing as people burned. I'm sure they left out the part where Rain was brainwashed for years, where Mama Mathers was constantly watching him, where he since has realized that he was part of a terrible system and has tried to move away from it the best he could. I'm sure they left all that part out.
Right. And they were probably, telling this story to mercenaries and murderers in the first place.
Yeah, which, I mean, if you look at Tattletale, to swing back to our what is Tattletale doing question, Tattletale is not a morally perfect human being, but if you go up to Tattletale and say, hey, this guy burned a bunch of people alive in a mall, can you help us take him out? That seems like a reasonable request.
Right. And also they probably didn't add like, oh, by the way, he's like 15 or something.
Right.
I mean, I don't actually remember exactly how old he is, but like, yeah, in our world, he would be considered a minor, even if, we would punish him, but we wouldn't execute him.
Yeah.
Except maybe in some states. Moving on. So Chris approaches and we get a description of what keen vigilance looks like. Bulbous with big dark eyes, armor plates, and coarse hair, a long snout with side-set eyes, and blades of mingled bone and steel secreted among the armor plates.
I love Chris. I love Chris so much.
Can't wait for fan art of this one. I'm sure it already exists, actually. We learn a bit of important background about Rain, that he turned himself in, he talked to people about it as much as he could, and that's how he got into therapy. And I like that because I've actually wondered, like, how did he get into this therapy situation in the first place? And that's kind of, oh, I see.
Yeah. But it's something that Cradle refuses to believe. Like, he doesn't accept it. Like, his response is, oh, he told you that, huh? And we know for a fact that it's true, because how else would he have teamed up with this therapy group, right? Like that this obviously actually happened, but he can't admit it. To him, Rain will always be this kid who ruined his life, this evil monster. He can't see past that image of the person that wronged him. And this is all starting to sound really familiar, isn't it?
Yes, as we'll see. So as Victoria patches up Rain's extravagant wounds, it strikes me that Rain would be super dead right now, just like all of the fallen mooks who were lying around, if Operator Red had just tried to cut his jugular instead of, cutting him up so that he could die slowly and painfully, which were the orders. So he's alive and he lives through this because the objective was to torture him to death and not just kill him.
Yeah, that's totally justice, right? That's what that is.
Right.
Definitely justice.
Total justice. So Chris gets annoyed with their ham-fisted attempts at saving Rain, and he offers some of his private stash of coagulants. And as they're digging through the Tupperwares, he says, "Careful what you touch." And then he explains, "One day I come apart instead of changing back," which is really not something we heard of at all before, and makes me wonder if it's something that Chris is afraid of happening, or something that happens regularly, or what exactly.
Yeah, it's really mysterious either way, and Chris is like quickly becoming my favorite character on the team. There's so much still we need to learn about him, but the things we do know are fascinating. He has to live with these mental and physical mutations and the inherent risks that go along with them. And he seems always prepared, always smart. Like he's ready for all these things. He's ready for all these eventual outcomes. And he actually takes it all very, very seriously, because there's even a moment after they use the coagulant on Rain that like everyone's fighting. And he's like, no, you got to put the needle back in the case, because I actually need this shit. It's really important for me. And like he comes off as this sarcastic like kid that like pokes at people and is annoying. But man, he's complicated.
Yeah, and he's competent too, as we'll see. He's actually very effective in this fight, even considering who he's up against. Yeah, so this act of injecting the coagulant prompts Operator to attack, meaning that Chris's Boy Scoutliness here with the coagulant is what saves Rain, because before that, they were just going to let him bleed out, and now it's obvious that they're kind of turning it around, so that's why the villains attack.
Yeah, which is what betrays Cradle's true hypocrisy here, right? Like, revenge is bad. Don't attack me because you must stop the cycle of revenge. Wait, he might live. Oh shit, we gotta fight you now.
Yeah,
like
right.
that's the true hypocrisy of it. That it's, come on, dude.
Yeah, I agree. So begins this battle. So Operator Red first fights Chris and Capricorn, and then later goes after Vista, who is eventually able to keep him effectively stymied for most of the battle by warping the terrain around him and just keeping him away from people. Cradle at first holds back and then eventually starts fighting Victoria. He uses his invisible attack, which turns out eventually to be invisible force-infused cables that extend from the fingers of one of his hands, the giant robot hands, I should say. Look-See then overlays the cables with a red after image so Victoria can basically see them and avoid them.
Yeah, this is all really cool. And once again, we've kind of rushed through it, but I like how structurally the information regarding the force-infused cables is doled out to us. It's really fun to look at this specifically, because we start out with, he swiped a hand in my general direction, coming almost 10 feet shy of connecting. I put the wretch up anyway. I glanced at what was happening below, and then something hit me like a truck, knocking the wretch out and knocking me almost 20 feet through the air before I could right myself. So we see here, like, Cradle swings and completely misses 10 feet away, and it's only kind of dumb luck that Victoria says, I'm going to put the wretch up anyway. And then she looks away from the battle. So he missed, I'm going to focus my attention somewhere else because he missed so badly. And then, bam. And both Victoria and the reader are then forced to be like, what the hell was that? And it gets you into the situation where you're like, what is going on? And it's a great way to introduce and then slowly reveal what Cradle is actually doing here. And I do also like that bit where it's like this kind of Victoria Kenzie combination idea to figure out how to let them see what this thing is. It's all in all, I think it's just a really smartly written scene.
Yeah, and this is one of the ones that I just blew through the first time through, because there's something about like invisible weapon where you're just like, oh my God, I have to figure out what's going on. This is so tense. And it could be anything. It could be anything.
Yeah, the first time I read it, I actually thought that the hands were attached to invisible wires from him. So he was just beating them with the hands, but they couldn't see the wires attaching them. And that I was like, well, I don't understand that. And that was just because I was reading it very fast on my first read through.
Yeah, somehow I think I had a similar misconception, but it's a misconception that makes no sense because the writing is very clear.
Oh, it's very clear. It's very clear. I think it's just literally skipping paragraphs because you're reading too fast, or skimming paragraphs.
Yeah. Yeah, so they're not making much, or Victoria's not making much headway in fighting Cradle, and Victoria goads him verbally, pointing out that he left himself off when he was listing all of Rain's crimes. Cradle finally becomes emotional and explains, he took me from me. And Victoria immediately relates to this idea, and Cradle goes on, he infected me, and now I'm different. He violated myself. And of course, Victoria's mind immediately, automatically moves to defend Rain, and she thinks to herself, it was upbringing, really questionable upbringing. Sometimes, or even a lot of the time, he was in a bad place, desperate, with nobody to turn to. He regrets it. He's trying to do better. He was willing to turn himself in. even though that wasn't what Cradle wanted or needed. He didn't want any of this any more than Cradle did. It wasn't him that screwed with Cradle like that. It was the power acting according to some alien programming. And then she says, and then she ends the thought with no. And of course, the reason why is that all of these lines could be perfectly, without any change other than the gender pronoun, be applied to her sister.
Perfectly. Almost as if her thought process was constructing them to make that link.
Yeah.
Because it's just perfect.
Yeah. And she can't say any of it because, as she thinks, it would compromise her integral self.
Wow. So this is, I think, my favorite spot in the book. And I think this is the most important part in the book, this realization. And we have to go back to parse this. Comparing Rain and Amy is something that Victoria has done before. The time when he kind of came out to the group and told them who he was and what happened, she made a direct connection to Amy's realization of where she came from and this deep secret that Amy had, and reflected it in this deep secret that Rain has. And she kind of saw it as this comparison. And I think back then you and I said, because Victoria is making a direct line between Rain and Amy, Rain could kind of serve as a test case for her. If she can get herself to a place where she's okay and she can deal with what he did, perhaps one day there's a chance that she will be able to get herself to move past the things that Amy did to her. And we said that at that time, and then we got to see Victoria kind of reconcile with Rain, right? Like, she seemed to understand and process what he did, and possibly got herself to a place where she was okay with it. And perhaps she didn't fully understand what it was that Rain had done, that she didn't fully connect those dots fully yet, but she does here. She makes this connection now, and dot by dot, argument by argument, constructed sentence by constructed sentence, she draws the link between the two of them. Everything that she said about Rain is true about Amy. Everything. But she can't say that. She can't say it. And she can't even connect those last two dots and finish that whole picture. Because she never says Amy's name here. She never even consciously thinks about Amy. In fact, she consciously rejects it. She says no. One word, one paragraph, a line by itself to emphasize it here on the page. No, I am not going to go there. I am not going to make that connection. To do so would risk her integral self, her very understanding of herself and her place and the things that happened to her and the people that did them to her. She's just not ready to deal with that yet.
Yeah, I love the use of this word integral self. And I wonder if I'm overinterpreting here, but is the implication that this is a self that she has put together by integrating different kind of rationalizations or interpretations of, what happened to her, so that she has this narrative, and what this is actually a threat to is it's a threat to that integration. It's a threat to that narrative. In which case, I think she'd be exactly right. It's just the truth is that narrative probably needs to be challenged, and she's in the process of doing so, actually.
Well, when someone does something terrible to you, awful, the worst thing you can imagine, the only way you can process how someone will be capable of doing that kind of thing is if you kind of other them and make them into a monster, because then it makes sense. Why would someone do this to me? Because they're evil, they're a monster, they're terrible. And so this idea that maybe it's just a combination of all these factors, a combination of all these things that built up, that many of which are out of that person's control. She can't handle that yet. She can't deal with that yet. It's too much too soon.
Yeah.
And I love that. I love it so much. And I think my favorite part of all this, though, the most like heartwarming part of all this to me, though, is that even with that realization, even connecting the dots, even realizing this connection between Rain and Amy, and rejecting that connection out of like fear of destroying her integral self, she still has to save Rain. She still has to stop Cradle. Because, yeah, Rain and Amy have a lot in common. And yeah, Victoria and Cradle, as their victims, do too. But they're not the same. Victoria Dallin is a fucking hero. A hero who says that letting Rain die, a person that did to this man the same thing that Amy, the person she hates almost more than anything in the world, did to her, letting him die, that would violate my integral self too. Just as much. More. Because Victoria, despite all of her issues, can see what Cradle cannot. That this is not justice. This is revenge. And it's just wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, that's like you said, this is a beautiful story moment. I guess I haven't ranked the moments in my head, but this is definitely one of my favorite moments because it's cutting right to the core of her. It's pinpointing exactly one of her vulnerabilities and putting her in a position where she would be sorely tempted to say, oh, I get it. Yeah, this guy's right. This guy is justified. And the part of her that is a hero proves to be the stronger part. And despite the fact that she gets it, she can't let him get away.
Yep. It's wonderful. I love Victoria so much.
Yeah, me too. So now Cradle begins to do something complicated with the cables, involving several of the giant tinker hands. And finally, several pages too late, I get his name, Cradle, as in Cat's Cradle.
Yeah, it took me a few times reading the chapter and prepping my notes and reading you writing that down before I made that connection. Hey, we're good at our jobs.
Yeah, that's why we do so many read-throughs.
Yes.
So Capricorn and Sveta start lobbing chunks of Capricorn stone and then flashing it back and forth between water and rock so that it kind of gums up the robot and just makes a huge hassle for Cradle. This puts enough pressure on him that Chris can kind of sneak up and start applying pressure, and also so Kinsey can pull off her gambit, which involves moving the projected cables such that Cradle dodges an attack that isn't real. And then Victoria is able to grab him and kind of just toss him somewhere where he won't be much of a problem. And having done this and suitably threatening him, he calls off the combat tinker.
This is motherfucking teamwork, yo.
Yeah.
This is I think that's what this is a perfect reflection of, is that because all of these guys are now working together, working in sync. It's so funny because at the beginning of the battle, we talked about how Victoria felt that she felt a certain amount of frustration that she like didn't know what her teammates were thinking, that she couldn't react to their unspoken plans because she didn't really know them yet. And now we're here chapters and chapters later, and they kind of just construct this entire way of defeating him without a lot of speaking between them. I mean, there's like some short lines, like she literally just says to Kenzie, "Can you see what he's doing?" And then they concoct this plan, and then Sveta and Capricorn just do this thing, and Kenzie comes up with this plan, and they're all just kind of in sync now without really communicating that with each other. And that's pretty great.
Yeah, and I kind of just like to follow Chris as he's doing his own thing on the sidelines and darting around and crawling up and just constantly being a thorn in the guy's side.
Right. I don't want to exclude him from it either, because he is very much distracting the combat thinker who could be fucking their entire world up. Yeah,
I guess the thing to say about Chris maybe is that it seems like Victoria and Kinsey are actually communicating. Sveta and Tristan are communicating. Chris isn't really communicating with anyone. He's just taking opportunities, which is a fine, role.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So now Tattletale breaks in on the call and admits that, yes, she did lead those bad guys to Rain. There's no point in denying it at this point. But she really wants them to leave Cradle alone. But they won't. And there's really interesting behavior from Tattletale through these chapters. Like we've said, she's like really wants him to leave Cradle alone. She's promising to help in chasing down the escaping Crowleys. If they'll let Cradle go, she'll help them get March and Prancer to help too. Just really wants him to let Cradle go.
Yeah. I mean, so much so that like whatever she's doing, Cradle is integral to that somehow, because like I will go out of my way, do everything I can. Just please don't let him go.
Yeah.
Or please, yes, let him go. Please do not take him into custody. Do not leave him with the Fallen. Like I need him. I need him. I don't think this really gives us too many clues into what she's doing. She talks about how she's worried about the bigger picture. She talks about how the Fallen and specifically the Crowley band of them are way more influential than anyone really knew. It's tough. It's tough to know what to think here, man. And because I think we have to acknowledge kind of our worm-driven biases around this thing, because I like Tattletale. I've always liked Tattletale, and you have my perspective as the reader coming in liking her, butting heads with Victoria's perspective as I don't trust anything this person says. I am convinced that they are terrible and are lying to me constantly. And it's kind of like, how do you parse this? I don't know what to think.
Yeah. I think, even we might be tempted to think Tattletale is lying or exaggerating things if we hadn't had a recent chapter from Citrine where she kind of hinted at, if I remember correctly, she hinted that the Fallen might be kind of a bigger threat than people realized. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I don't really have much to add there, other than like we know Tattletale is being truthful. Victoria doesn't believe her, and we also get why she doesn't believe her, or at least she's mistrustful of her. She's not.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't help that Tattletale has to like fucking rib her with things constantly, where she's like, this is the kind of thinking that gets one institutionalized, which is just a great word usage to use on Victoria. I mean, really going to win her over to your side with that one, Tattletale.
Yeah, absolutely.
She can't stop.
It's like on the one hand, she's being like almost plaintive, like almost begging and just offering like quite a lot. And then on the other hand, she's like, let me say the worst possible thing I can say to this person.
Yeah. Just pick out the one word that I know is going to piss her off and just slide that right in between the ribs.
So now, just kind of hitting this beat of Victoria's progression, Kenzie asks regarding Rain, is he really that bad? I don't know, I said. I wasn't willing to spare the time to check either. But if this doesn't work, I didn't finish the sentence. And then she thinks, if this doesn't work, thinking about all the responses I couldn't give Cradle, would I be willing to try another route? Another healer? And there's some progress there.
Yeah, no coincidence, I think, that this comes after Victoria's huge kind of internal realization. I would not be surprised if, despite the rejection of that line of thinking in the moment, we see Victoria really start to battle internally and push internally against her own conclusions regarding Amy and what happened and what she did and how much she's responsible for and how much she should continue to hate her for it. I think that's going to be something we're going to see more and more as we go. And this is a step of it that she even posits, however briefly, to tap her sister for help if she can't get healing for someone. And I think like it seems like that's the obvious thing we're building to, right? It seems like there's going to be a situation where the only choice is to go to Amy for help, and whether Victoria will be willing to make that choice or not, we will see. But it seems like the obvious path to go, which means it might not be the one. But I kind of wondered going into this big war if that's where we were going to go. That someone was going to be hurt so bad that hey, we gotta. The only hope is to go to Amy.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting that it got to the point where she was willing to consider it, and it forces you to wonder, would she have had to go that way? Would she have gone that way if the healer, if the advanced guard healer wasn't available?
Right.
And we're not 100% sure.
I don't think she's ready. I mean, I think the best she would do is like drop him off with someone that could do it. I don't think she could do it. But then again, what if she's the only one? She can fly. It's...
Yeah. Or what if her sister's like, I'll only do this if you ask me personally, you know?
Yeah. I don't think that would help the relationship if she's that restrictive on it. Yeah, right. I'll save this dude's life, but only if you specifically ask me to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That'll really, really bring them back together, you know?
Yeah. Really good best foot forward.
Yeah.
So now, having defeated the villains, Victoria leaves to find the advanced guard healer. She stumbles upon Prancer, who is without Velvet or Moose, looking quite dark, seeming a little bit broken. He does point the way, and she finds the healer. And it's Scapegoat. So for those of you who don't necessarily mainline this stuff like we do, Scapegoat was the healer who repaired Taylor's blindness, lung damage, and several months of accrued horrible injuries during the Echidna fight. But his power requires that he take on the injuries of the person he's healing, more or less.
I'm glad you remembered to do that thing we always promise to do, but always forget to do.
Yeah, it's so hard. But Scott, Scapegoat, is a traitor. He went fallen.
Say it ain't so, Scapegoat.
Yeah, I'm so shocked that this guy would have waffly morals.
Now I feel way less bad about the fact that he has to take on the injuries himself. Yeah. Good, Scapegoat. Good. Yeah, it's still one end of world and betrayal later, and he's still getting stuck taking on a ton of pain and discomfort when people ask him to heal people.
That's funny. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, in case that reference I just made wasn't clear, the only reason he helped Taylor was that he was already basically corrupt.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah. So Tattletale supplies what Scapegoat needs to hear to actually go through with the healing. So once again, Tattletale proves clutch. The theme of this arc so far is side characters giving clutch performances.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a few important beats that I think we need to at least reference here. I don't have a lot to discuss with them, but I think they're important character beats. Victoria first is entirely resistant to the idea of being healed by someone. Like Scapegoat sees the bullet wound in her arm and says, "Oh, you need healing," and she's like, "It'll heal naturally." Wonder why she doesn't like people using their healing powers on her.
Right.
And the second one is that Victoria, before she will let Scapegoat heal Rain, she needs his direct consent. She says specifically, "I need you to say yes to this, or I will not let him do it." And I wonder why she needs that to happen too.
Yeah.
It's almost as if someone healed her without her consent.
Yeah, and it made me wonder what would have happened if Rain was actually just completely passed out at that point.
I know, that would be another interesting kind of moral dilemma for our hero.
Yeah.
Dodged. Thanks for staying up long enough to just give consent, Rain.
Yeah, he's really good at that's a minor power that he has we haven't heard about. It's the ability to remain conscious without any blood in his body.
So now that we know, or at least it certainly seems like Rain is not going to be dying here, I'm curious, did you think it was going to go this way? The first chapter left on a kind of cliffhanger where we're not sure if Rain is like doomed or not. And I'm curious what you were expecting.
So you and I talked about this at the end of, or after reading the first chapter, and I said 50-50. I literally said, I think it could go either way. I literally predict 50% odds that he's dead, 50% odds he's alive. So I guess I'm not surprised that he's alive, but I like the story was at a point, his character was at a point where I felt like it was very plausible that he would be dead.
Yeah, I think I was 60-40. 60 being alive, 40 being dead. Mm-hmm. And I think you're absolutely right. It feels like there was more to do with him. There's more going on with this cluster. But the more I thought about it, the more I think you could explore the cluster without him necessarily needing to be there.
Yeah.
So I think it absolutely would have worked with him dead.
I think I probably would have felt really like sad and despondent about it if he was dead, and like which is kind of what you want to accomplish with the story when you kill someone, but also like you said, when it feels like there was more to be done with the character, you're just like, oh well, that just seems like a wasted opportunity. So yeah. I'm glad he's not dead, and like I don't like. I was thinking about it beforehand. Even I was like, so if he does live through something like this, like, am I going to feel like the stakes are reduced? And I'm like, no, actually,
No.
because I wanted him to live, so this is actually a relief, and it doesn't really affect my belief that characters can die in the story.
Do we have to have another conversation about death and stakes and how you don't have to have people die to define stakes in a story?
We may at some point, Scott, but
I'm gonna have to. I'm just gonna
not today.
That's on my tombstone. It's gonna be, I'm dead. Do I have stakes now?
Yeah,
You bastards.
you care about this now.
It's such a lazy argument. Anyway, let's move on.
Yeah. So here, Ashley now arrives on the scene, and while Victoria feels like a smile would be inappropriate in this context, that kind of suggests that seeing Ashley makes her want to smile involuntarily, and that's very Bulbasaur.
Yeah, I saw you put you wrote Bulba here, which is meaningless for anyone that's not on our Discord.
You all know what I mean.
Yeah. I think Victoria's kind of proud of Ashley in this moment, right? And I am too. And I love their little awkward wave. Like, I want to smile, but that doesn't seem right. So it's just like hey, how's it going?
Yeah. Yeah. My new BFF is here, but I'm self-conscious about it. So I'm going to acknowledge her, but not in a way that makes it weird.
Mm-hmm.
Thereby making it way more weird.
Yeah, of course.
So the chapter wraps up with Victoria telling Looksee to let Tattletale know that she'll consider working together.
Big move.
Yep.
But first she needs to find out what the fuck is going on here.
That's right.
And I say, me too.
Yes.
Spill it, Tattletale.
All right. So moving on to name game. Cradle. So I was wondering what Cradle means.
For the longest time.
Yeah, real long time. Like, because for Snag, we kind of had to figure something out eventually, which, very abstract kind of. I was expecting Cradle to be similarly abstract, where it's like, well, maybe he's carrying something, which I think is probably, on that level, that kind of makes sense. Like his robot is a cradle that carries him.
Carrying him.
And he's carrying some kind of grudge. But also, the whole point of his robot is that it does a cat's cradle with invisible magic force cables.
Yep.
So,
pretty cool.
We have solved the cradle puzzle.
Okay, now you can die, Cradle. I mean, what? No.
Okay, so discussion question, Scott?
Yeah, so like we hinted at earlier, let's talk about justice and revenge. Let's talk about what are the difference between the two things, and how do you think the story effectively communicates that philosophy?
Yeah,
and I don't want to get too far into the specifics of the scenario here, because I absolutely think the story comes pretty far down on what Cradle is talking about is not justice. I think that the story is pretty definitive in that, but let's be a little more abstract about it.
Yeah, because you can nudge the scenario around by changing minor details, and that's kind of why it's worth thinking about.
Yeah, I mean the whole torture and bleed out slowly part of the thing is really a strike against it being justice.
Yes, I agree. So
yeah, just explore that a little bit, and I think that's what the text is asking us to do. So let's do it.
Sounds good. And that's it. That's all we got for you this week on We've Got Ward. You guys are all part of this show, so feel free to provide us with advice, questions, or thoughts on this week's reading.
You can reach us via email at gotwormpod@gmail.com or on Twitter at gotwormpod. My personal Twitter is at scottdaily85, and Matt's is at catscradle. Mail.
That's right. If you're not already subscribed to We've Got Ward, we strongly recommend you do so and never miss an episode. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere else in the world you can listen to podcasts.
But still not Spotify, sadly.
Or iHeartRadio.
Wait, that's a thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
It sucks.
As always, you can find this, all the other podcasts we do, and all of our writing, essays, film and TV criticism, and more at dailyplanetfilms.com. This week, over on the main Daily Planet channel, we've assembled a crack team of podcasters to review Avengers: Infinity War. Also, on Vow to View, our other show, Elise and I celebrate Teacher Appreciation Week with some of our favorite teacher movies. I picked School of Rock because Jack Black is hilarious, and Elise picked Dead Poet Society because it's a great movie.
Awesome. Can't wait to listen to that. And I would mention that the Infinity War podcast was the greatest crossover in podcasting history because we had Steven Zuber of the Bayesian Conspiracy podcast on with us.
Yeah, one of those rationality podcasts.
That's right.
It's so rational.
Yes, it was a very rational discussion.
It was.
So if you like...
Infinity War is great.
Infinity War is great, by the way, incidentally, on this superhero podcast we're doing right now. If you like any of these other shows that we do and you want to support them, consider donating to our Patreon account, patreon.com/dailyplanetfilms. If you can donate $1 a month or whatever else you can afford. Supporting us on Patreon gives you tons of great bonuses like voting in our quarterly fan art contests, Q&A sessions, access to live streams of our recording sessions like this one, and our excellent Discord chat. Special thanks to new Planeteers Liam, Thiago, Sarek, all at the $1 level, Andre, at the $2 level, and Trevor at the $5 level, and new Kryptonian Frustrated Free Buddha, who has upgraded to the $20 level. Thanks so much, everyone. We really appreciate that. It just feels great to know that people are willing to support us like that.
Yeah, Matt, we're getting dangerously close to the Stephen King podcast.
Oh no,
gonna have to start really planning for that one.
Yeah.
On top of all the other stuff I'm doing.
Oh God.
Goals are fun.
Yeah.
But
it's like a treadmill. It just starts going faster.
I'm so excited though.
Yeah, me too.
It's really exciting.
Yeah. And as always, make sure you go over to Wildbow's Patreon and donate to him as well. This is his world. We're just playing in it.
And if you cannot afford to donate right now, that's absolutely okay. You can instead help us out by heading on over to Apple Podcasts. I keep putting iTunes in here. I've been told it's Apple Podcasts is what you're supposed to say. So head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and a review. No new reviews to read this week, sadly. You're making Matt sad, guys. You look how sad he is.
Oh.
You can't see him, but he's looking real sad right now.
All right. Well, that's it for the show this week. Next week, Arc 6 continues.
Okay, we need to leave the show on a little bit of a high note, Matt.
Next week, Arc 6 continues.
All right.